Do you have a seasonal business that hires seasonal employees? There are some major changes ready to take effect on the 2nd of September, and they're aimed at supporting viticulture and horticulture industries to make sure that the recognized seasonal employer scheme is actually a lot easier for employers to work with. If you want to know about all these changes, then stick around because this is your ticket to understanding the RSC scheme. Hi everyone, welcome back to Lawlands. My name is Sanam and thank you so much for tuning in today. I always thought that immigration was going to be something I'll barely touch on, but again, I am back with another immigration update, and this time it isn't about the accredited employer work visa. This time it is actually about the recognized seasonal employer scheme. So this is for the 2024 to 2025 season. So keep that in mind. It's not the season that's just gone. We're looking at from now moving forward until 2025. Last year, when the coalition government came in, there was some major responses around a policy review when it came to this recognized seasonal employer scheme. I'll call it an RSC to make it easier so I don't have to keep saying out the entire title. But these changes are one of many that are going to come out. But this is the first step, essentially, in doing an overhaul of the scheme so that it allows for a lot more flexibility for employers and also employees coming into New Zealand. And we'll get into what all of the changes are. But before we get into it, I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone that's been following the podcast. If you aren't following the podcast, then don't forget to subscribe. And if you want more insights, then feel free to jump over onto LinkedIn and give me a follow, because I post all of the tips and tricks that employers, managers, HR professionals need to know so that they stay compliant and on top of all these key changes. So let's get into it. Let's kick it off by looking at the cap increasing. Now, with the cap increasing, what was really interesting was that the number when we were looking at the Labour government bringing in a lot of these RSE workers, it was actually much lower. And the coalition government actually, as part of their efforts that they made in terms of changing different areas as part of their policies, one of the things was to up the amount of RSE workers that can come in to New Zealand. These migrant workers normally come in, work for a little bit, and then they have to go back. It's a very seasonal approach with this visa and this scheme. So they're not here for extensive periods of time. What's really important is the cap will increase again. So what we're looking at is about 20,750 will be the cap of how many workers can come to New Zealand. So that's a 1,250 person increase. In May, a lot of you would have known that there was an allocation survey that was put out. If you requested an increase during that survey, expect to hear back from an engagement partner soon, and they'll have more details around what you need to do. Keep in mind, these changes are all coming into effect on the 2nd of September. So you've got a little bit of time up your sleeve, and it's now just a matter of making sure that your applications, all the information that you've got is all in order and that you've done all of your agreements and everything correctly. Now, with working hours, there has been a major change here. So let's talk about this, because it's always been difficult with seasonal workers to have minimum hours because of factors that are outside of the employer's control. As you know, with seasonal work, that means working on farms, whether that's orchard, dairy farms, anything under the sun when it comes to outdoors can be impacted by weather, for example. Employers have raised concerns about this, and the coalition government really listened here, and Immigration New Zealand has turned around and said, look, starting from the 2nd of September, what we're going to do is allow for a 30-hour minimum weekly work requirement, averaged over 4 weeks, which is a huge game changer. So instead of making it that it has to be a minimum of 30 hours every week and it gets assessed on a weekly basis, now what you've got is that your 30 hours minimum has to happen weekly. But if 1 week, let's say that the weather's not that great on a couple of days and you can't send the employees out, then you just need to make up those hours the next week. And over a 4-week period, what you need to see is that the employee has done 120 hours. So instead of paying employees for unworked hours during a slow week, which effectively puts a lot of pressure onto an employer, right? You're paying them to effectively not work. Now you can average that out. If you cannot provide 120 hours over that period, that's over that 4-week period, then you'll need to top up the employee's wages, just like you would in a normal scenario without this visa. You would just need to make sure that you top it up to meet that minimum guaranteed weekly hours. hours. And this is a huge, huge change. That's a positive direction for a lot of these employers, because at the end of the day, this was something that everyone was crying out for. So the next change that's actually come up is an increase in wages. The increase in wages is actually around a particular type of RSE employee that's coming back. So it's basically an RSE worker that's in their third season or more. So you're not brand new to RSE work. This is your third season or more. That is when you'll be entitled to a higher wage. So that's $25.47 per hour. And that is 10% more than what we are seeing as the adult minimum wage across New Zealand. So for workers that are just coming in brand new and they are doing their first season, then that is the standard minimum adult wage that you would be getting, and that would still apply. But if you are coming in for a third season or beyond, that's when the $25.47 is applicable. Accommodation costs are another area that we will see some major change, because there has actually been a current pause on increasing any kind of accommodation costs for these particular workers, which means that over a 12-month period, an employer now is able to increase those accommodation costs by either 15% or by $15, whichever is less. So you have to pick the lesser of the two. And these increases are only allowed for workers who haven't signed agreements about accommodation costs before the 2nd of September. So for those workers, the rent will increase within 12 months and they'll still be restricted under residential tenancies legislation. They'll still be a part of the system in that way. So that's really important. Just make sure you are capping it at the right amount, whichever is less, not whichever is more. Then the next thing that's changing is to do with the movement of employees. We used to have a situation where with RSE workers, it was hard for the employee to go to another part of New Zealand for a long period of time. So at the moment, there's a 14-day grace period where the employee and the employer are able to have the employee move between different work sites. This is now going to be extended to 21 days. And so what this means is that it allows for a lot more flexibility. And employers are now able to have these employees go from site to site because they have multiple work sites. And now we've got this 21 days. And it could be because maybe the employer's work site is in Hawke's Bay and now you've got to get to another part of New Zealand, like South Island, for example, and work there. And if you're already working as a seasonal employee, there are different sites that you can move around and it will make things a lot easier. The government is also looking at other ways to enhance flexibility to make this a lot better. And one of the things that they are looking at, and this is just more of a side note, is looking at labour market testing so that we are looking at making sure that New Zealanders are prioritised and we are still protecting these RSE workers' welfare. Labour market testing, we know that it is one of those difficult areas where we put out the job, tons of people apply, but they're not actually the right fit. And it's usually the RSE worker or a migrant employee that's the better fit for the role. But it's good that at least that's being looked at, and hopefully we'll have enough small businesses and agricultural and horticultural businesses really weighing in on this particular topic. The last two major changes, one is to do with the multi-entry into New Zealand. Now, with this, basically the visa didn't allow you to come in, come out of New Zealand after you got the visa. Now it allows for multi-entry into New Zealand. And from the 2nd of September, we're going to see this change to allow for more flexibility for these RSE workers so that they can actually go home if they need to. You know, funerals happen, there might be a wedding happening. Workers will need to obviously cover the costs of their temporary departure and flights, but that is something that's available to them. The last major change was to do with the HIV screening. It was removed from a lot of schemes and a lot of visas back in 2021, and this was one of the visas that still had it. So now, as of the 2nd of September, there won't be any HIV screening required at all for employees coming in, and it's because this was seen as a health risk or a medical condition that could impose a lot of costs on New Zealand, but we're not seeing that anymore. Those were the key major changes that I could see impacting employers across New Zealand dealing with these RSE schemes and these workers, but There are a few little other changes as well, and I will link that information into the description, so feel free to check that out. I'll also have information about the guides and the forms that need to be done for the RSE. Now, last thing I wanted to cover as well was just a couple of things to take away, but it's really important that as an employer, if your agreement to recruit, so your ATR, and if you're listening to this and you're brand new to RSE workers, you probably won't know what this is, but if you've been in here doing this, then you know what an ATR is. Your agreement to recruit. If you submitted that before the 2nd of September, then the current policies will still apply. You can request an update to your agreements. Otherwise, the current policies will still apply as they are. You can do this by submitting a variation to the agreement to recruit. If your ATR is submitted on or after the 2nd of September, you'll need to ensure your agreement aligns with the new policy. The last thing you want is your application held up because it doesn't meet requirements. So like I said, I'll put all the information in the description so that you can work through the entire process and see if anything needs to be revamped. I know this was a quick one, but I wanted to give you a good summary of the changes around the RSE scheme. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed this one, share it with your friends, your colleagues, anyone that's running a business, that's a manager, that's a leader. Well, you know what time it is. That's it from me, everyone. I hope you have a lovely day, night, evening, morning, whatever it may be. And guess what? I'll catch you in the next one, everyone.